Political philosophy is the study of how people put rules together to run a society. It asks why some rules exist, who makes them, and what they are meant to do. It looks at power, justice, rights, and the good life. In this way, it is like a map that shows how groups of people can live together without chaos. The map is drawn by thinkers who try to see what is fair and what works best. The earliest ideas about political order come from ancient Greece and China. Plato, a Greek thinker, wrote about a city called Callipolis in his work called The Republic. He asked what a ruler should be like and how the city should be organized. Plato said that the best city is run by philosophers because they love truth. He wrote, "Until philosophers are kings, cities will have no rest." That line shows his belief that knowledge should guide power. Plato also talked about the idea of justice as each person doing the job they are best at. He used the image of a well-run ship where the captain knows the sea and the crew knows the sails. On the other side of the world, Confucius taught about order in families and in the state. He said that a ruler should be like a caring parent, and that people should respect their elders and follow proper rituals. In the Analects he said, "When the ruler is upright, the people will be upright." He meant that good leadership creates good behavior. Confucius did not write a big book about a perfect city, but his ideas about respect, duty, and harmony have shaped Chinese thinking about government for centuries. Both Plato and Confucius start with a simple question. How can people live together in peace? They answer it by looking at the role of leaders and the habits of citizens. Their answers are different, but they both see politics as a way to shape human life. To see political philosophy in everyday life, think of a classroom rule system. A teacher decides that students must raise their hand before speaking. The rule is meant to keep order and give everyone a chance to be heard. The teacher is the authority, but the rule works because the students agree it is fair. The rule also shows a balance between freedom to speak and the need for order. This small example reflects a larger political idea: how a community can protect both individual voice and collective calm. Another simple example is a neighborhood watch. Residents agree to look out for each other's houses, call the police when something looks wrong, and share information about safety. The watch is not a formal government, but it is a group that creates its own rules about who can patrol, what they can do, and how they report problems. The watch shows how ordinary people can organize power to protect their own lives. It also raises questions about who decides the limits of that power. These two examples bring the big ideas of political philosophy down to the level of daily life. Political philosophers have built many arguments about why societies need rules. One classic argument says that without rules, life would be a state of nature where everyone looks after themselves and conflict would be constant. The argument claims that a social contract, an agreement among people to follow common rules, makes life safer and more predictable. The contract is not a written paper, but a shared belief that rules matter. The idea helps explain why people obey laws even when they do not see a ruler directly. A second argument focuses on the idea of the common good. It says that the purpose of government is to help people achieve what they need to live well together. The common good is not just the sum of individual wishes, but a set of conditions that let everyone thrive. For example, clean water, safe streets, and public schools are things that benefit all. The argument says that the state should protect and provide these things, even if it means limiting some personal choices. Both arguments have faced criticism. One counterpoint asks whether any single theory can fit every situation. A city in a desert, a mountain village, and a coastal port each have different needs. A theory that works for one may fail for another. This criticism reminds that political ideas must be flexible and that local customs matter. A second counterpoint questions whether people can truly agree on a social contract. History shows many groups who felt left out of the agreement, such as women, slaves, or colonized peoples. If the contract excludes some, can it claim to be fair? This challenge pushes philosophers to think about inclusion and power. History offers vivid stories that illustrate these ideas. In ancient Athens, the assembly gathered on a hill called the Nix. Citizens, who were adult male property owners, would stand and speak about war, law, and taxes. One day, a man named Cleon shouted for more soldiers, while another, Pericles, argued for a careful budget. The crowd voted by shouting "wise" or "no." The Athenian assembly shows a direct form of democracy, where ordinary citizens could shape policy. It also shows limits, because many people, women, slaves, foreigners, could not speak. The story helps see how early political thought tried to balance voice and order. A later story comes from England in 1215. King John was forced to meet with barons at Runnymede, a meadow beside the River Thames. The barons demanded limits on the king's power, especially on taxes and arbitrary arrests. The meeting produced a short document called the Magna Carta, which said, "No free man shall be seized or imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his peers." This moment is often called the birth of constitutional limits on power. The Magna Carta shows how a group of people can demand that a ruler follow rules, a core idea of political philosophy. Modern interpretations of political philosophy take these old ideas and apply them to new problems. One modern thinker, John Rawls, wrote about justice as fairness. He imagined an original position where people choose rules behind a veil of ignorance, meaning they do not know their own wealth, race, or talent. From that spot, they would pick rules that protect the least advantaged. This thought experiment updates the social contract idea for a world with many different groups. Another contemporary view comes from feminist political theory. It argues that traditional political philosophy often ignores how gender shapes power. It points out that rules about work, family, and the body affect men and women differently. By adding gender into the analysis, feminist thinkers expand the idea of the common good to include care work and bodily autonomy. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in debates about public health. During a pandemic, governments may require masks or vaccines. The argument for these rules follows the common good logic. Protecting health for all may limit personal choice. Critics use the counterpoint about the social contract, asking whether the government has the right to force people when the risk is low for some. The debate shows how old philosophical arguments still shape policy. Another example is the discussion about voting rights. Some argue that expanding the vote makes the social contract more inclusive, while others fear that too many voices could lead to chaos. The balance between broad participation and effective decision-making mirrors the Athenian assembly's strengths and limits. Throughout these discussions, one idea recurs: power must be checked. Plato warned that a ruler who does not love truth can become a tyrant. Confucius warned that a ruler who does not act with virtue will lose respect. Modern thinkers echo this by calling for independent courts, free press, and regular elections. These institutions act as brakes on power, keeping the political system from sliding into abuse. An analogy can help clarify the role of these brakes. Imagine a bicycle with two wheels. One wheel is the law, keeping the bike upright. The other wheel is the people's voice, steering the bike where it should go. If one wheel is missing, the bike tips over. Political philosophy studies how to keep both wheels balanced so the bike moves forward smoothly. A second analogy compares a garden to a society. The gardener, the government, decides where to plant, how much water to give, and which weeds to pull. The plants, citizens, need space to grow, but they also need the gardener's care. If the gardener is too harsh, the garden dies. If the gardener does nothing, weeds take over. The garden picture shows the need for both guidance and freedom. The next part of the series will turn to the idea of liberty. Liberty asks how much freedom each person should have while still keeping the garden healthy and the bicycle upright. It will look at how different thinkers measure the line between personal choice and collective order. In sum, political philosophy asks how people can set up rules that let them live together in peace, fairness, and safety. It began with Plato's vision of philosopher-rulers and Confucius' call for moral leadership. It lives on in the classroom rule system, the neighborhood watch, the Athenian assembly, and the Magna Carta meeting. It wrestles with arguments about the social contract and the common good, while facing counterpoints about diversity of cases and exclusion. It adapts to modern issues like health policy and voting rights, and it uses analogies like bicycles and gardens to make big ideas clear. The study continues to guide how societies shape power, protect rights, and seek the good life for all. The journey will now move toward the question of liberty, where the balance between freedom and order will be explored in depth. The idea of liberty has been at the heart of political thought for centuries. It first appeared in the writings of ancient philosophers who asked what it means to live free. The modern discussion began in the 17th century when thinkers started to write about the rights of individuals against the power of kings. One of the earliest voices was John Locke. Locke argued that each person has a natural right to life, property, and freedom. He wrote, "All men are naturally in a state of perfect freedom, and can order their actions as they think best, within the limits of the law of nature." In simple terms, Locke said that people are born free and that any government must protect that freedom. Locke's ideas spread quickly across Europe. They helped shape the English Bill of Rights of 1689. That document listed specific limits on the king and guaranteed certain freedoms for the people. For example, it said that the king could not suspend laws or impose taxes without Parliament's consent. The Bill of Rights was a concrete step in turning the abstract idea of liberty into a law that could be seen in everyday life. It showed that societies can protect personal freedom while still keeping order. A few centuries later, another thinker, Isaiah Berlin, added a new layer to the conversation. Berlin distinguished between two kinds of liberty. He called one negative liberty, the freedom from interference by others. He called the other positive liberty, the ability to act on one's own goals and values. Berlin wrote, "If liberty means the freedom to do what we like, then the problem is that we can be free to do what we do not want." In plain words, Berlin warned that too much freedom can lead to chaos if there is no limit on what people can do. Berlin's two-sided view helps explain why societies sometimes set limits on personal freedom. The idea of negative liberty suggests that the best way to protect freedom is to keep the government out of people's lives. The idea of positive liberty suggests that some rules are needed so that everyone can truly pursue their goals. The tension between these two ideas creates the core debate about liberty and its limits. One everyday example of this tension can be seen in a parent setting a bedtime for a child. The child wants to stay up late to watch TV or play video games. The parent says, "You must be in bed by 9. The parent's rule limits the child's freedom to stay awake, but it also protects the child's health and safety. In this small scene, the parent's authority is like a government that limits personal choice for a larger good. The child's desire for more freedom mirrors the idea of absolute liberty, while the parent's rule mirrors the idea of necessary order. A second example can be found in a city that bans loud music after midnight. Musicians and partygoers may want to keep the music playing, but the city imposes a curfew to let residents sleep. The ban limits personal enjoyment, yet it protects the community's peace. This example shows how a rule can be seen as an intrusion on personal freedom, but also as a way to keep order in a shared space. These two examples illustrate the everyday balance that societies try to achieve. The balance is not always easy. Some people argue that any restriction is a step toward tyranny. They claim that the only true liberty is the one that places no limits on what a person can think, say, or do, as long as they do not harm others. This view is often called absolute freedom. It holds that the government should stay out of private lives, that laws should be minimal, and that markets should decide most things. Opponents of absolute freedom say that without limits, society can fall into disorder. They argue that some rules are essential for safety, health, and fairness. This view is sometimes called necessary order. It says that the state must sometimes step in to protect citizens from harm, to protect public health, and to keep the peace. The necessary order side points to examples like traffic laws, sanitation standards, and anti-discrimination rules. Without these rules, daily life would become unpredictable and dangerous. The clash between these two views can be traced back to the English Bill of Rights. When Parliament forced the king to accept the bill, some people saw it as a victory for liberty. Others feared that the new limits on the king would lead to endless new rules. The Bill of Rights gave the people the right to petition the king, to bear arms, and to have a fair trial. It also set limits on the king's power to levy taxes and to keep a standing army without consent. The document showed how a society can grant many freedoms while still keeping a framework of order. A later historical moment shows the other side of the story. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 marked the end of a regime that heavily restricted personal freedom. People in East Germany were finally able to travel, speak, and work without constant surveillance. The wall's collapse was celebrated as a triumph of liberty over oppression. Yet, the sudden opening also brought challenges. The new government had to create laws, a market, and social services for millions of people who had lived under strict control. The transition showed that gaining freedom can also bring a need for new rules to manage the change. The fall of the wall also gave a vivid illustration of Berlin's positive liberty. The East Germans wanted more than just the absence of interference. They wanted the chance to shape their own lives, to own property, to start businesses. Their desire for positive liberty required a new set of institutions, not just the removal of the old ones. This moment helps explain why many modern thinkers see liberty as a mix of both negative and positive aspects. Modern interpretations of liberty often blend the two classic views. Some political philosophers argue that liberty is best understood as a set of capabilities that people can actually use. This view, called the capabilities approach, says that a person is free only if they have the real chance to do things like get an education, find a job, or vote. In this sense, liberty is not just the absence of rules, but the presence of opportunities. The approach suggests that limiting a person's ability to learn or to earn a living is a violation of liberty, even if no one is directly stopping them. Other contemporary thinkers focus on the idea of freedom of choice. They argue that a market economy gives people many options, and that the best way to protect liberty is to keep markets open. They point to examples such as online shopping, where a consumer can pick from thousands of products. In this view, the role of the state is to protect property rights and enforce contracts, but not to dictate what people can buy or sell. The argument rests on the belief that when people have more choices, they are more free. Both modern views still wrestle with the same question that Berlin raised. When does a rule protect liberty, and when does it hinder it? The debate shows up in current issues such as data privacy, vaccine mandates, and free speech on social media. For instance, a city may require businesses to collect consent before sharing personal data. Some see this as a safeguard for individual freedom. Others argue that it limits the flow of information and hurts innovation. The same pattern repeats. A rule meant to protect can also be seen as a restriction. A real-world application of these ideas can be found in the debate over public smoking bans. Public health officials argue that banning smoking in indoor spaces protects the health of non-smokers. Smokers, however, claim that the ban infringes on their personal choice. The law reflects a balance between the right to health, a form of positive liberty, and the right to act as one wishes, negative liberty. The outcome of the debate varies by country, showing how societies weigh liberty against collective welfare. Another example is the regulation of noise in residential neighborhoods. Many towns have ordinances that limit how loud a party can be after a certain hour. The rule is meant to let people sleep and live peacefully. Residents who enjoy late-night music may feel that the rule curtails their personal enjoyment. The ordinance illustrates how a community decides where the line should be drawn between individual fun and the common good. The conversation about liberty also appears in the realm of education. Some argue that parents should have the absolute right to choose any school for their children, even if the school teaches ideas that the broader society finds controversial. Others say that the state must set standards for what is taught, to ensure that all children receive a basic, shared knowledge. The clash mirrors the larger debate. Should the state stay out of personal decisions, or should it intervene to guarantee a common foundation for all citizens? Historical anecdotes can help make these abstract ideas feel more real. One story tells of a small English village in the 1700s where a group of farmers refused to pay a new tax on grain. The king's officials sent soldiers to collect the tax, but the villagers gathered in the town square and sang songs about freedom. The standoff lasted 3 days before the officials backed down, fearing more unrest. The episode showed how ordinary people can push back against what they see as an unjust limit on their liberty. A second anecdote comes from the early days of the Berlin Wall's construction. A young East German named Peter tried to escape by digging a tunnel under the wall. He and his friends worked in secret for months, moving soil at night. When they finally emerged on the west side, they were greeted by cheering crowds. Their daring act became a symbol of the human desire for freedom, even when the state tried to impose a hard limit. The story highlights how powerful the drive for liberty can be and how it can inspire people to take great risks. Quotes from primary sources give a voice to the thinkers themselves. Locke's famous line, "Where there is no law, there is no freedom," reminds listeners that some rules are needed for liberty to exist. Berlin's observation, "The most dangerous thing in the world is a man who has nothing to lose," warns that when people feel completely oppressed, they may act in extreme ways. Both quotes add depth to the discussion, showing that the balance of freedom and order has been a concern for centuries. The debate over absolute freedom versus necessary order can be illustrated with a simple analogy. Imagine a river that flows freely through a valley. If the river runs unchecked, it may flood the fields, destroy homes, and wash away roads. If a dam is built, the water can be controlled, used for irrigation, and kept from harming people. The dam represents rules that limit the river's natural flow, but it also provides benefits that the unchecked river cannot. In the same way, a society must decide how much of a dam to build around personal liberty. Another analogy uses the idea of a game. In a game of soccer, each player is free to run, pass, and shoot. However, the game only works because there are rules about offside, fouls, and the size of the field. Without those rules, the game would become chaotic, and no one would enjoy it. The rules do not take away the fun, they make the game possible. This picture helps explain why many people accept some limits on freedom as part of a larger, enjoyable system. The discussion of liberty also touches on the concept of social contract. This idea, first put forward by Locke, says that people agree to give up some of their natural freedoms in exchange for protection and order from a government. The contract is like a handshake between the citizens and the state. If the state breaks the agreement by violating rights, the people have the right to change it. This notion shows why some limits on liberty are accepted. They are part of a deal that promises safety and stability. Critics of the social contract argue that it can be used to justify any rule, no matter how harsh. They point to historical periods when governments claimed they were protecting the public, while actually suppressing dissent. Equality has been a central idea in political thought for thousands of years. The story begins in ancient Greece, where Aristotle asked what it means for people to be equal. Aristotle wrote that equality is a proportion. He meant that people should be treated the same when they have the same merit, but that differences in ability can justify different treatment. He also warned that the equal is the opposite of the unequal. For Aristotle, the goal was a balanced community where each citizen received what he or she deserved. This early view set the stage for later debates about how to measure merit, how to protect the weak, and how to keep society fair. Centuries later, the Enlightenment brought a new vision of equality. The French Revolution shouted "Liberté, égalité, fraternité." That slogan was more than a chant. It was a promise that every citizen would have the same rights under the law. The revolutionaries believed that the old order, based on birth and privilege, had to be replaced by a system where all men were equal before the state. The phrase "égalité" captured a hope that political power, legal protection, and social opportunity would no longer be reserved for a few. In the 20th century, John Rawls revived the discussion with a fresh theory. Rawls wrote in A Theory of Justice that a just society is one that would be chosen behind a veil of ignorance. He imagined people who do not know their own wealth, talent, or status. From that position, they would agree on two principles. First, each person gets the most basic liberties. Second, social and economic differences are allowed only if they benefit the least advantaged. Rawls summed this up with the phrase, "justice as fairness." He also said, "The principles of justice are those that free and equal persons would accept in an original position." Rawls placed equality at the heart of political design, arguing that fairness requires a safety net for the poorest and a level playing field for all. These ideas have moved from theory to everyday life. One clear example is the fight for equal pay for equal work. In many countries, women still earn less than men for doing the same job. The principle of equality says that if two workers produce the same output, they deserve the same wage. Laws, such as the Equal Pay Act in the United States, try to turn that principle into practice. The law says, "It shall be unlawful to discriminate because of sex." When a company pays a female employee less than a male colleague with the same qualifications, it violates the idea that the law treats them as equals. A second everyday scenario involves school grading policies. Imagine two students, Alex and Maya, who both complete the same assignments, attend the same classes, and earn the same test scores. If the teacher gives Alex a higher grade because of a family name, that is an injustice. Equality in education means that grades should reflect only the work done, not any background factor. Some school districts have adopted blind grading, where the teacher sees only the work, not the student's name. This practice tries to honor the principle that each child deserves the same chance to succeed based on effort and ability. These examples show how the abstract idea of equality can shape concrete rules. Yet the idea also meets strong objections. One common counterargument is that merit should decide rewards. Proponents of meritocracy say that people who work harder or who have greater talent deserve higher pay and better grades. They argue that rewarding merit encourages effort and innovation. In this view, strict equality could punish those who excel, because it would require taking away benefits from the most productive. Critics of this view point out that merit is often hard to measure fairly. Social background, access to resources, and hidden biases can affect performance, making it hard to know whether a difference truly reflects merit. A second counterargument stresses cultural differences. Some societies value hierarchy and respect for elders more than uniform treatment. In such cultures, giving everyone the same share might be seen as disrespectful to tradition. For example, in certain family businesses, older members receive larger portions of profit because they have built the company over many years. Those who argue from this perspective say that imposing a one-size-fits-all notion of equality can erase valuable customs. They claim that political systems should allow space for cultural variation, even if that means unequal outcomes in some areas. Both objections raise important points, but they also reveal limits. The merit argument assumes that the playing field is already level, which history shows is rarely true. The cultural argument can be used to hide discrimination when tradition masks unequal power. The challenge for political thinkers is to find a balance that respects genuine differences while protecting the vulnerable. Historical anecdotes illustrate how societies have wrestled with this balance. During the French Revolution, the slogan Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité was not just words on a banner. In 1791, the National Assembly passed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Article 1 declared, "Men are born free and remain equal in rights." Yet the revolution also saw the reign of terror, when the new government used violent means to enforce its version of equality. The episode shows that the pursuit of equality can become extreme if the state tries to impose it without regard for individual rights. Another powerful story comes from the United States civil rights movement of the 1960s. Young activists staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, demanding the same service as white customers. One participant later recalled, "We sat there because we wanted to be treated like any other person." The sit-ins forced the nation to confront the gap between the promise of equality in the Constitution and the reality of racial discrimination. The movement succeeded in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made it illegal to discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This legal change turned a moral claim into a binding rule, showing how equality can move from theory to practice. Modern interpretations of equality build on these past lessons. Some scholars speak of substantive equality, which looks beyond formal rules to the actual outcomes for people. They argue that simply saying the law treats everyone the same is not enough if the results still favor certain groups. Substantive equality asks whether everyone truly has the chance to enjoy the same life prospects. Others use the term equality of opportunity, which focuses on removing barriers that prevent people from competing on equal terms. This view supports policies such as affirmative action, scholarships for disadvantaged students, and universal health care. These policies aim to level the starting line so that merit can be expressed more fairly. An analogy can help clarify the difference between formal and substantive equality. Imagine a race where all runners start from the same line, but some have to wear heavy backpacks. Formal equality would say the race is fair, because everyone runs the same distance. Substantive equality would notice the backpacks and provide lighter gear to those who need it, so that each runner can rely on their own speed. The analogy shows why many modern thinkers push for policies that adjust conditions, not just rules. Real-world applications continue to grow. Many countries now have pay transparency laws that require companies to publish salary ranges. The idea is that when pay information is open, it becomes harder to hide unequal wages. In education, some districts have adopted universal design for learning, a set of teaching methods that aim to reach students with different learning styles. By offering multiple ways to engage with material, Schools try to give every learner a fair chance to succeed, reflecting the principle of equality in practice. The conversation about equality also reaches into technology. Algorithms that decide who sees a job ad or which loan application gets approved can unintentionally favor certain groups. Critics point out that if the data fed into these systems reflect past biases, the outcomes will repeat inequality. Some tech companies now run rule bias audits to check whether their tools treat all users fairly. This effort shows how the old question of equal treatment is being re-examined in a digital age. Looking ahead, the next big theme in political philosophy is justice. Equality is a key part of justice, but it is not the whole picture. Justice asks how benefits and burdens should be shared in a society that respects both fairness and individual rights. The next section will explore how thinkers link equality to broader ideas of justice, and how modern policies try to balance the two. In summary, equality began as a philosophical question about proportion in ancient Greece. Aristotle warned that true equality must consider merit, while Rawls argued that fairness requires protecting the least advantaged. Everyday life shows the idea in action through equal pay and fair grading. Counterarguments about merit and cultural tradition remind that equality is not simple. History provides vivid stories, from the French Revolution's rallying cry to the sit-ins that reshaped American law. Modern thinkers add layers such as substantive equality and equality of opportunity, using analogies and policies to bring the ideal into daily life. As the discussion moves forward, equality will remain a cornerstone of the larger quest for justice. Justice is often described as fairness in how goods, rights, and duties are shared among people. In the simplest sense, justice means that each person receives what is due, no more and no less. The ancient philosopher Socrates asked his fellow citizens to think about what a good life looks like, and he linked that idea to a society that treats its members with equal respect. Later, the economist Amartya Sen wrote that justice is about removing the barriers that keep people from living the lives they value. Sen's view adds a practical side. Justice is not just a rule, but a chance for each person to thrive. Imagine a group of friends sharing a pizza. If the pizza is cut into equal slices, each friend gets the same amount. That simple act feels fair because the food is divided without favoritism. Now picture a city planning a new park. The city must decide where to place the park, how big it should be, and who will maintain it. If the park is built in a neighborhood that has long lacked green space, the decision helps balance the city's resources and gives more people a place to relax. Both the pizza and the park illustrate how justice works in everyday life, by giving each person a fair share of what is available. The idea of fairness in law is an older thread in philosophy. Socrates, as recorded by his student Plato, faced a trial that tested the limits of law and fairness. In that trial, the state accused Socrates of corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. Socrates chose to defend his ideas rather than flee, even though he could have escaped. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." His calm acceptance of the verdict, even when it meant death, shows a belief that the law, however flawed, must be respected. The story of his trial still raises the question: when is it just to obey a law that seems unfair? Centuries later, after the devastation of World War II, European nations began to build what is now called the welfare state. Governments created healthcare, unemployment benefits, and public education to make sure that all citizens could enjoy a basic level of security. This move was driven by a belief that society should help those who have lost jobs, health, or homes. The welfare state is a modern example of justice as fairness in distribution. Resources are shared so that no one is left completely without support. It shows how ideas about the common good can become real policies that affect millions of lives. Two major ways of thinking about justice focus on different goals. Retributive justice looks at punishment as the main response to wrongdoing. It holds that a person who harms another should receive a penalty that matches the seriousness of the act. The principle behind it is often summed up as one eye for an eye. In this view, the law's role is to keep order by making sure that bad actions are met with fitting consequences. Retributive justice can be seen in many court systems that hand down prison sentences based on the severity of crimes. Restorative justice, on the other hand, asks what can be repaired after a harm has occurred. Instead of focusing on punishment, it seeks to bring together the person who caused the harm, the person who suffered, and the community. The goal is to understand the impact, to apologize, and to find ways to make things right. This approach often includes community service, mediation, or agreements that help the offender rebuild trust. Restorative justice believes that healing the relationships can prevent future harm and strengthen the common good. Both ideas have strong supporters and critics. Proponents of retributive justice argue that without clear penalties, people may feel that the law is weak and crime could rise. They point to cases where victims feel that justice was not served because the offender received a light sentence. Critics of retributive justice say that punishment alone does not fix the underlying problems that lead to crime, such as poverty or lack of education. They also note that harsh penalties can sometimes hurt families who are already struggling. Supporters of restorative justice claim that it helps victims find closure and gives offenders a chance to learn from their mistakes. They cite programs in schools where students who bully others meet with the bullied student to discuss the harm and agree on steps to improve behavior. Critics argue that restorative methods may be too soft on serious offenses and that some victims may not want to engage with the offender. They worry that the approach could let dangerous people avoid stronger punishments. A useful analogy can help picture these two views. Think of a broken window. Retributive justice is like a rule that says anyone who breaks a window must pay a fine equal to the cost of the glass. Restorative justice is like a neighbor who, after the breakage, invites the person who broke the window to help clean up, replace the glass together, and talk about why the break happened. Both aim to fix the damage, but one focuses on payment, the other on repair and learning. Historical anecdotes add depth to these ideas. When Socrates stood before the Athenian jury, he could have chosen exile, but he stayed because he believed that obeying the law was part of the social contract that holds a community together. His decision left a lasting impression on later thinkers who argued that citizens have duties to the state, even when the state makes mistakes. Another anecdote comes from the early years of the British welfare state. In 1948, the National Health Service opened its doors, offering free health care to all citizens. The launch was celebrated with a simple message: health for all. This act showed that a government could see the health of its people as a shared responsibility, not just an individual concern. Quotes from primary sources bring these thoughts to life. In Plato's Apology, Socrates says, "I am not afraid of death, for I know that if I have done nothing wrong, I will not be punished." This line reflects his trust in a higher sense of justice beyond the courtroom. Amartya Sen, in his book, The Idea of Justice, writes, "Justice is about removing unfreedoms that keep people from leading the lives they have reason to value." Sen's words connect the abstract idea of fairness to the everyday ability to choose one's path. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. In many cities, planners use the concept of the common good when deciding where to put public transportation. They weigh the needs of commuters, businesses, and neighborhoods to create routes that serve the most people. When a city builds a bike lane, it is acting on a belief that safe travel is a shared benefit, not just a private convenience. In schools, teachers may use restorative circles after a fight, allowing students to speak about feelings and agree on steps to avoid future conflict. These practices show how the theory of justice can shape daily life. Looking ahead, later sections will examine how modern philosophers such as John Rawls built on these ideas. Rawls introduced the veil of ignorance, a thought experiment that asks people to design a society without knowing their own place in it. This method tries to guarantee fairness by removing personal bias. The discussion will also explore how contemporary thinkers adapt the ideas of retributive and restorative justice to digital spaces, such as online harassment and cybercrime. In summary, justice as fairness touches both the distribution of material goods and the way laws are applied. The pizza example shows how equal sharing feels right, while the city park illustrates how public resources can be allocated for the benefit of many. The trial of Socrates and the birth of the welfare state give historical depth to the notion that societies must balance individual rights with collective responsibility. Retributive and restorative justice present two ways to answer the question of what should happen when rules are broken. Each has strengths and weaknesses, and each can be seen in real policies, school programs, and community projects. By keeping the focus on fairness and the common good, the conversation about justice remains relevant to everyday life and to the larger story of how societies strive to treat each person with respect. Authority and legitimacy are the twin ideas that help explain why people follow leaders. The story begins long before modern states, when small groups needed rules to keep peace. Early humans learned that a shared sense of right and wrong made life easier. Over time, thinkers tried to name the forces that make a rule feel right. Two of the most famous names are Thomas Hobbes and Max Weber. Their thoughts still shape how people think about power today. Hobbes wrote in the mid-1600s, a time of war and chaos in England. He believed that without a strong ruler, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In his book Leviathan, he said that people give up some freedom to a sovereign in exchange for safety. The agreement is called a social contract. Hobbes called the sovereign's power authority. He argued that this authority is legit because people have consented to it, even if they do not see the ruler every day. He wrote, "Covenants, without the sword, are but words." The sword, in his view, is the power that backs the promise. Max Weber, writing a century later, added a new angle. He said that legitimacy is not just about consent, but about belief. Weber identified three types of legitimate authority: traditional, based on long-standing customs; charismatic, based on a leader's personal charm; and legal rational, based on rules and laws. He wrote, "Legitimacy is the belief that the exercised authority is justified." For Weber, the law itself can give authority a sense of rightness, even when the ruler is far away. These ideas help explain why people obey everyday rules. Think of a traffic light. The red light does not have a person standing there to tell drivers to stop. Yet drivers stop because the law says the light is a signal of authority. The rule is written in traffic codes, and the police enforce it. The light's power comes from the legal rational system that Weber described. Drivers obey not because they love the light, but because they believe the rule is right and expect a penalty if they do not follow it. A second everyday case is a sports coach giving instructions. A coach may not have a legal code behind each command, but the team follows because the coach has earned trust and respect. The authority here is partly traditional. The coach's role has always been to lead, and partly charismatic. The coach's personality inspires confidence. Players obey because they believe the coach's direction will help them win. The coach's power feels legitimate because the team shares the belief that the coach knows the best way to play. These examples show how authority can arise from law, from tradition, or from personal appeal. They also show how legitimacy works in practice. Yet not everyone accepts the source of legitimacy. Two major counterarguments question the basic ideas of Hobbes and Weber. The first counterargument comes from anarchist thought. Anarchists argue that no ruler, no matter how well-intended, can be truly legitimate. Emma Goldman wrote, "The state is the great fiction that people have created to keep each other in check." From this view, authority is always a form of coercion, and any claim to legitimacy is a cover for power. Anarchists point to the fact that many laws protect the interests of the powerful rather than the common good. They ask whether the social contract is ever truly free, or whether it simply masks domination. The second counterargument is cultural relativism. This view holds that what counts as legitimate authority depends on cultural context. Ruth Benedict once said, "Culture is the total way of life of a people, and the values that give it shape." A rule that feels legitimate in one society may feel oppressive in another. For example, a ruler who claims divine right may be accepted in a society that believes the gods choose leaders, but the same claim would be rejected in a secular democracy. Cultural relativism reminds us that legitimacy is not a universal formula, but a local story. Both critiques push the conversation beyond Hobbes' contract and Weber's types. They ask whether any authority can be truly justified, or whether legitimacy is always a matter of perspective. History provides concrete moments when societies tried to make authority and legitimacy clear. One snapshot is the signing of the United States Constitution in 17. The delegates gathered in Philadelphia to replace the weak Articles of Confederation with a stronger government. They wrote, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." The preamble itself claims legitimacy by saying the people are the source of power. The Constitution created a legal rational system, elected officials, written laws, and a system of checks and balances. The authority of the new government rested on the belief that the people had consented to it, echoing Hobbes' contract idea, but also on the rational design that Weber highlighted. A very different historical picture comes from the Chinese imperial examination system. Beginning in the Sui dynasty, 5081-618, and flourishing under the Tang and Song, the exams selected officials based on knowledge of Confucian texts. The system claimed legitimacy because it was based on merit, not birth. It was a legal, rational process, though it also relied on traditional values of Confucian virtue. An official who passed the exam was seen as having earned the right to govern, and the emperor's authority was reinforced by the idea that the bureaucracy was staffed by the most capable men. The exams lasted for centuries, showing how a society can build legitimacy through a structured, rule-based method. Both snapshots illustrate different ways to build authority. The U.S. Constitution used a written contract with the people, while the Chinese exams used a merit-based test tied to cultural ideals. In each case, the people were asked to believe that the system was fair and justified. Modern interpretations of authority and legitimacy often blend Hobbes' and Weber's ideas with newer thoughts about democracy, human rights, and global governance. Today, many nations rely on constitutions that spell out the limits of power, echoing the legal rational type. At the same time, charismatic leaders still emerge, especially in times of crisis. Social media has added a new layer. Online influencers can gain authority through personal appeal, even without formal titles. The question of legitimacy now includes whether a leader respects human rights, whether laws are applied equally, and whether citizens can hold leaders accountable through elections or protests. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. In the workplace, a manager's authority may be based on the company's policies, legal, rational, and on the manager's reputation, charismatic. In schools, teachers follow a curriculum set by the Education Board, but they also earn respect through their teaching style. In each case, people obey because they see the rule as right and expect a benefit or avoid a penalty. Another modern example is the public health response to a pandemic. Governments issued mask mandates and vaccination requirements. The authority behind these rules came from scientific agencies and legal statutes. People complied when they believed the rules protected health and when they trusted the experts. When trust eroded, compliance fell, showing how legitimacy depends on belief. Analogies can make these ideas clearer. Imagine a game of chess. The rules of chess are written down and accepted by all players. The player with the white pieces does not have more power because of birth. The power comes from the rules that say white moves first. If the players all agreed to change the rule so black moves first, the authority of the original rule would disappear. The game shows that authority is only strong when the players accept the rule as fair. Another analogy is a family dinner. The parent may set the rule that everyone washes dishes after eating. The rule is accepted because the family believes it keeps the home tidy, legitimacy. If the parent suddenly demanded that the children never speak again, the rule would feel oppressive and lose legitimacy, even though the parent still has authority. The family's belief in the rule's purpose determines whether they follow it. Historical anecdotes add texture. One story from the French Revolution tells of a crowd gathering at the Bastille in 1789. The crowd demanded that the king respect the new rights declared by the National Assembly. The king's traditional authority was challenged because the people no longer believed his rule was legitimate. The event shows how quickly legitimacy can crumble when belief changes. A second anecdote comes from ancient Rome. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he broke a long-standing law that forbade a general from bringing an army into Italy. Some Romans saw his act as a bold step towards stronger leadership, while others viewed it as a betrayal of the Republic's traditions. The split illustrates how the same act can be seen as either legitimate or illegitimate, depending on which type of authority, traditional or charismatic, is valued. Quotes from primary sources help ground the discussion. Hobbes wrote, "Knew the only way to erect such a common power as may defend them from the invasion of each other and the mischief of their own wickedness is to confer upon one man or upon a known assembly the power of making laws." Weber noted, "The rational legal authority rests upon a belief in the legality of enacted rules and the right of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue commands. The U.S. Constitution begins, 'We the people, which itself is a claim of legitimacy." The Chinese examination system was described in the Book of Rights. "Those who study the classics and pass the exams shall be appointed to serve the emperor." Anarchist Emma Goldman warned, "The state is the great fiction that people have created to keep each other in check." Ruth Benedict reminded, "Culture is the total way of life of a people and the values that give it shape." Putting all these pieces together, a picture emerges of authority as the power to command and legitimacy as the belief that the command is right. Hobbes and Weber give a framework. Authority can come from a contract, from tradition, from charisma, or from law. Everyday examples like traffic lights and sports coaches show how these ideas work in daily life. Counterarguments from anarchists and cultural relativists remind that legitimacy is never absolute. Historical moments such as the signing of the U.S. Constitution and the Chinese imperial exams show how societies have tried to build lasting legitimacy. Modern examples in health policy, workplaces, and online culture show that the conversation is still alive. The next part of the video will move from authority and legitimacy to the idea of democracy. Democracy asks how people can share authority. how legitimacy can be renewed through voting, and how the balance between rules and the will of the people can be kept healthy. The story will continue, showing how the search for fair authority never ends. Democracy means rule by the people. The idea first grew in the ancient city of Athens, where every free male citizen could speak and vote in the assembly. In that setting, the word demos meant the people and kratos meant power. So together they formed a system where the community itself decided the laws. The Athenian assembly met on a hill called the Nix. Citizens gathered, listened to a speaker, and then raised their hands to accept or reject a proposal. The process was direct. The people acted as both lawmakers and judges. This early form of democracy showed how a group could share power without a king or a single ruler. The Athenian model inspired later thinkers. Pericles, the famous statesman, wrote that city is the work of many hands, and each must have a share in the decision. Aristotle, though critical of pure democracy, noted that the best form of government is one in which the many rule for the common good. Their words remind modern readers that the core of democracy is participation and the hope that many heads are wiser than one. Centuries later, philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that freedom comes when people obey laws they have made themselves. He wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. The chains are the laws he has not helped to write." Rousseau's idea of the general will became a cornerstone for modern democratic thought. John Stuart Mill added that the liberty of the individual is paramount, but the voice of the many protects the individual from tyranny. Mill's words highlight the balance between personal freedom and collective decision. In the modern world, democracy rarely looks like the Athenian assembly. Most nations use representative democracy, where citizens elect officials to act on their behalf. The United States, for example, holds elections for presidents, senators, and representatives. In these systems, the people do not vote on every single law. Instead, they choose people they trust to make choices. The idea is that elected officials will listen to their constituents, bring expertise, and craft policies that reflect the public's wishes. A simple way to see representative democracy in action is a school class electing a monitor. The students discuss the role, perhaps write down ideas, and then each student casts a ballot. The student who receives the most votes becomes monitor and speaks for the class. The monitor does not decide every detail of school life, but he or she helps organize activities, reports problems to the teacher, and represents the class's interests. This small example mirrors a larger political system. The class is the community, the monitor is the representative, and the vote is the expression of the people's will. Another everyday example is a town holding a local referendum. Suppose a small town wants to decide whether to build a new park. The town council proposes the plan, then invites all residents to vote. Each resident writes a yes or no on a ballot, and the final count decides the outcome. The referendum lets the whole community have a direct say on a specific issue, just as the ancient Athenians did for major policies. It also shows how modern societies blend direct and representative elements. Elected officials propose, but the people give the final approval. Supporters of democracy argue that it gives legitimacy to law. When people have a chance to vote, they feel the rules belong to them. This sense of ownership can make citizens more willing to obey the law and to cooperate with each other. Democracy also allows for peaceful change. If a ruler becomes unpopular, the next election can replace him without bloodshed. The ability to replace leaders through voting is a key reason many people view democracy as the most humane form of government. Democracy also encourages discussion. In a free society, ideas can be aired, debated, and tested. The marketplace of ideas, a phrase popularized by John Stuart Mill, suggests that truth emerges when many viewpoints compete. When citizens talk, listen, and argue, they sharpen their own understanding and learn to respect different opinions. This process builds a culture of tolerance and mutual respect, which many see as essential for a peaceful community. However, critics point out serious problems. One worry is the risk of full-majority tyranny. This phrase describes a situation where the majority imposes its wishes on a minority, ignoring the rights of the smaller group. For example, if a majority of voters decided to ban a religious practice, the minority that follows that religion would lose a basic freedom. The concern is that democracy, if unchecked, can become a tool for oppression rather than protection. Another common critique is low voter knowledge. In many elections, a large share of the electorate knows little about the candidates or the issues. When people vote based on name recognition, slogans, or emotions rather than informed judgment, the result may be poor policy choices. The philosopher James Madison warned that both the people, if they are not informed, cannot be trusted to protect their own liberty. This warning highlights the danger of a poorly educated electorate. Both critiques have prompted counter-arguments from defenders of democracy. Regarding majority tyranny, many modern democracies embed constitutional safeguards. A constitution can limit what the majority may do, protecting basic rights such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly. The United States Bill of Rights, for instance, ensures that even if a majority votes to restrict speech, the Constitution blocks that action. This built-in protection shows that democracy does not have to be a tool for oppression. It can include rules that keep the majority in check. In response to low voter knowledge, proponents argue that education and a free press improve the situation. When schools teach civics, when newspapers provide unbiased analysis, and when public debates are open, citizens gain the information they need to make better choices. Moreover, some scholars suggest that even imperfect voters can produce good outcomes if many people participate. The wisdom of crowds principle holds that a large, diverse group can collectively arrive at better decisions than a few experts, as long as each person contributes independently. Real-world applications of democratic ideas go beyond schools and towns. In many countries, citizens vote on national referendums that shape the constitution. In 1995, South Africa held a referendum that approved a new constitution ending apartheid. The vote gave legitimacy to a historic change and showed how democracy can help heal deep wounds. In another case, the European Union conducts elections for the European Parliament, allowing citizens of many nations to choose representatives who shape policies across borders. These examples illustrate that democracy can operate at local, national, and even supranational levels. Modern interpretations of democracy also explore new forms. Deliberative democracy stresses the importance of thoughtful discussion before voting. Citizens gather in small groups, learn about an issue, and then decide together. This approach tries to raise the level of knowledge and reduce the influence of shorter-term emotions. Digital democracy uses online platforms to let people comment on drafts of laws, propose ideas, or even vote electronically. While technology brings new challenges, it also opens the possibility for more people to take part in decision-making. Historical anecdotes help bring these ideas to life. The first anecdote returns to ancient Athens. In 462 BC, the Athenian assembly voted to fund the construction of the Parthenon. The decision came after a heated debate, with citizens raising their voices, pointing to the city's need for a grand temple, and finally counting the votes. The result was a building that still stands today as a symbol of collective effort and shared purpose. The story shows how a community can come together, discuss, and create something lasting. The second anecdote moves forward to the post-World War I era. In 1948, delegates from 58 nations gathered in Paris to vote on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The draft text, written by a small group, was read aloud, and then each delegate cast a vote. The final vote was 48 in favor, none against, and 2 abstentions. The declaration became a global standard for human rights, and the vote demonstrated how an international community can use democratic methods to agree on fundamental values. The moment also highlighted the power of a simple vote to shape the moral framework of the world. Quotes from primary sources add texture to the narrative. Pericles once said, "Our constitution is called a democracy, because power is in the hands not of a few, but of the many." This line captures the spirit of Athenian rule. Later, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The will of the people is the only legitimate foundation of any government." Jefferson's words link the ancient idea to the modern belief that government must answer to its citizens. From the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1 declares, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." The article reflects the democratic belief that each person matters and deserves respect. Analogies can make abstract ideas clearer. Imagine a group of friends deciding where to eat. If one friend always chooses, the others may feel ignored. If everyone votes, the group finds a place that most like. This simple voting process mirrors democratic decision-making. Each voice counts, and the outcome reflects the group's shared preference. Another analogy compares a democracy to a garden. Citizens are like gardeners who plant seeds of ideas, water them with discussion, and prune away harmful weeds through debate. The garden thrives when many hands work together, just as a society thrives when many people participate in politics. The discussion of democracy naturally leads to the next topic, republicanism. While democracy focuses on the people's direct or indirect rule, republicanism adds the idea of a mixed government where the rule of law and civic virtue protect against both tyranny of the majority and tyranny of a single ruler. The upcoming section will explore how Republican thinkers built on democratic ideas to create systems that balance power, protect rights, and encourage responsible citizenship. In summary, democracy began in ancient Athens as a direct system where citizens gathered to vote on laws. Over time, thinkers like Pericles, Aristotle, Rousseau, Mill, and Madison shaped its theory, emphasizing participation, liberty, and the common good. Modern societies use representative elections, referendums, and new digital tools to let people influence decisions. Simple examples such as a class electing a monitor or a town voting on a park illustrate how the principle works in everyday life. Critiques warn of majority tyranny and low voter knowledge, but constitutional safeguards, education, and deliberative practices aim to address those concerns. Historical anecdotes from the Athenian Assembly and the 1948 vote on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights show democracy's power to create lasting change. Quotes from Pericles, Jefferson, and the UDHR remind listeners that the idea of rule by the people has deep roots and continues to guide societies. The next chapter will turn to republicanism, where the focus shifts to how laws, institutions, and civic duty combine to protect freedom and ensure stable governance. The idea of republicanism rests on the belief that a free community thrives when citizens think of the common good before personal gain. In this view, politics is not a game of power for a few, but a shared task that each person helps to carry. The ancient Roman statesman Cicero summed the idea in a short line: "The public good is the supreme law." Later, the American founding father James Madison echoed the same spirit when he warned that the accumulation of all powers in the same hands is the very definition of tyranny. Both thinkers placed civic duty at the heart of a healthy state. Republicanism asks each person to see themselves as part of a larger whole. It asks for a habit of service, a habit that can be seen in everyday life. One simple picture is a community clean-up day. Neighbors gather on a Saturday morning, bring bags, rakes, and a shared sense of pride. They pick up litter, paint fences, and plant flowers. The work does not belong to any one person, yet the result belongs to all. The clean streets make the whole neighborhood safer, more pleasant, and more valuable. The act itself teaches that a clean public space is a shared responsibility, not a private luxury. Another familiar example is the volunteer fire department. In many small towns, citizens sign up to become firefighters without expecting a salary. They train, keep equipment ready, and answer the call when a house burns. When the alarm sounds, the whole town feels a sense of relief, knowing that neighbors will risk their lives for the common good. The fire department works because each member believes that protecting lives and property is a duty owed to the community, not a job to be paid for. The everyday reality of these volunteers shows how Republican ideas can live in ordinary actions. The story of the Roman Republic gives a deeper look at how Republican ideas were built into a system of government. In the early Republic, power was split among several offices. Two consuls shared executive authority, each able to veto the other. A Senate, made up of former magistrates, offered advice and held long-term influence. The popular assemblies let citizens vote on laws and elect magistrates. This web of checks and balances was designed to stop any single person from becoming a ruler. The Roman writer Polybius noted that the mixed constitution keeps the power of the people, the aristocracy, and the monarch together so that each checks the other. The Roman experiment showed how a community could protect its freedom by spreading power and by demanding that citizens stay involved in public affairs. Across the Atlantic, the early United States faced a similar challenge. After the Revolution, the new nation debated how to keep power from concentrating in the hands of a few. The Federalist Papers, written by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, argued for a system where different branches of government would watch each other. Madison, in Federalist No. 10, warned that causes of faction cannot be removed, but they can be controlled. He believed that a large republic would make it harder for any single group to dominate, because many interests would have to compete. The debates in the Continental Congress and in state ratifying conventions showed that the founders saw civic virtue as essential. They expected citizens to stay informed, vote wisely, and hold their leaders accountable. The early American story illustrates how Republican ideas were tested in a new, modern setting. Republicanism is not without criticism. One common worry is that a strong focus on the common good can trample individual rights. Critics point out that when the community's needs are placed above personal freedom, the state may justify restrictions on speech, religion, or property. For example, a city council that forces every household to join a neighborhood watch program might claim it protects safety, but it also limits the choice of those who prefer not to participate. The tension between collective duty and personal liberty is a recurring theme in political thought. The philosopher John Locke, who championed individual rights, warned that the end of law is not to restrain, but to preserve liberty. When Republican ideals are taken too far, the balance can tip toward coercion. A second concern is the danger of elite rule. Republican thinkers often imagine a class of virtuous citizens who lead by example. In practice, however, those who are most active in civic life may also be the most powerful or wealthier. This can create a situation where a small group of elites decides what counts as the common good, while ordinary citizens are left with little say. The Roman Republic itself faced this problem when the Senate, composed of the aristocratic class, often steered policy in its own interest. Later, the early United States saw the rise of a political elite who shaped party platforms and controlled patronage. Critics argue that without strong safeguards, republicanism can become a cover for oligarchy. where a few rule for the benefit of themselves under the guise of public duty. Despite these worries, the core idea of civic virtue still finds a place in modern life. In many cities, citizens organize neighborhood watch groups that meet monthly, share safety tips, and coordinate with police. In schools, students run peer tutoring programs that help classmates succeed without extra cost. These actions echo the Republican belief that a healthy society depends on people who are willing to give time and effort for others. The modern volunteer fire department, the community garden, and the local Libraries for Friends group all show how ordinary people can keep the public sphere alive. Contemporary scholars have taken the classic Republican ideas and adapted them for new challenges. Some argue that digital platforms can become tools for civic virtue if they encourage informed discussion and collective problem solving. Others point out that online activism can also become a form of activism, where people feel they have contributed simply by clicking a button without real engagement. The debate continues about how to translate the ancient call to public service into the age of social media. One modern interpretation comes from the political theorist Philip Pettit, who describes republicanism as freedom as non-domination. In his view, a person is truly free when no one else has the power to interfere arbitrarily with their life. This definition links the old idea of civic duty to a fresh concern for protecting people from hidden power. Pettit's version suggests that civic participation is a way to keep power in check, because a vigilant citizenry can spot abuse before it becomes entrenched. Another current voice is that of the philosopher Amy Gutman, who argues that republicanism needs a public reason that everyone can accept. She says that citizens should discuss policies using reasons that all can understand, rather than relying on secret deals or narrow interests. This approach tries to blend the ancient focus on common good with modern ideas about inclusion and fairness. The everyday illustrations help to ground these abstract ideas. Imagine a town that decides to hold a monthly river cleanup. Volunteers gather, collect trash, and talk about why clean water matters for health, tourism, and future generations. The activity creates a shared story. The river belongs to all, and protecting it is a joint task. Over time, the town sees fewer floods, more fish, and a stronger sense of belonging among residents. The simple act of picking up litter becomes a lesson in how civic virtue protects the common good. Similarly, consider a volunteer fire department that trains high school students during the summer. The students learn how to handle hoses, how to read safety signs, and how to work as a team. When a fire breaks out, the department responds quickly, saving homes and lives. The community watches the young volunteers and feels proud. The experience teaches the next generation that public service is a valued part of life, not just a career choice. The firehouse becomes a place where civic duty is lived out daily. These stories show how republicanism can be more than a theory. It can be a pattern of behavior that shapes neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces. When people see that their actions matter for the whole, they are more likely to keep participating. The ancient Roman checks and balances, the early American debates, and the modern volunteer groups all point to the same idea. A free society needs active, responsible citizens. At the same time, the counterpoints remind that the balance is fragile. Too much pressure to conform to the common good can silence dissent. Too much power in the hands of a few can turn civic duty into a tool for control. The challenge for any republic is to keep the scales even, allowing both collective action and personal freedom to coexist. The next part of the journey will turn to the broader family of political ideas that compete and cooperate with republicanism. Liberalism, conservatism, socialism, and other ideologies each have their own view of how society should be organized and what role citizens should play. By comparing these schools of thought, the story of politics becomes richer and clearer. The exploration will continue, moving from the focus on civic virtue to the wide world of political ideologies. The story of modern political ideas begins in the age of revolutions, when people first asked how societies should be organized. One thread of that story is liberalism, a view that puts individual freedom and equal rights at the center of politics. The name John Stuart Mill appears early in that thread. In his book On Liberty, Mill wrote, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that single voice than he, if he were the only one, would be justified in silencing mankind." That line captures the liberal belief that each person should be able to think, speak, and act without undue interference, as long as those actions do not harm others. Liberalism grew out of the Enlightenment, a time when philosophers argued that reason could replace tradition. The idea spread quickly across Europe, and by the mid-19th century liberal parties began to appear in Britain, France, and the German states. Those parties championed parliamentary reform, free trade, and the rule of law. They argued that government should protect personal liberty, guarantee property rights, and give citizens a voice through elections. In practice, liberal reforms opened the doors for universal male suffrage, the removal of many old guild restrictions, and the rise of a middle class that could own businesses and vote. A second major thread is conservatism, a view that values order, tradition, and continuity. Edmund Burke is often called the father of modern conservatism. In his reflections on the Revolution in France, Burke warned, "The French Revolution is a storm which has no end, a flood which will drown all." Burke's words show his fear that sudden radical change could break the social bonds that hold a nation together. He believed that societies are like living organisms. They develop slowly, and each generation inherits customs that have proven useful. For Burke, the role of government is to preserve what works, to respect the wisdom of ancestors, and to guide change in a careful, measured way. After the French Revolution of 1789, many European rulers and thinkers pushed back against the new ideas of liberty and equality. That conservative reaction helped shape the political climate of the early 19th century, leading to the formation of parties that defended monarchy, the church, and established social hierarchies. In Britain, the Tory party, later called the Conservative Party, argued that stability and respect for long-standing institutions were essential for a peaceful society. Both liberalism and conservatism have been tested in everyday life. Imagine a high school where students argue about a dress code. The liberal side says that students should be free to wear what they want, as long as they are not hurting anyone. They point to the principle of personal autonomy and argue that forcing a uniform limits self-expression, which is a core part of developing an adult identity. The conservative side, however, says that a dress code keeps order, respects community standards, and prevents distractions in the classroom. They argue that schools have a tradition of modesty and that sudden changes could undermine respect for teachers and the learning environment. The debate mirrors the larger clash between individual freedom and collective tradition. A similar clash appears in a city council meeting about zoning. A group of developers proposes a new high-rise apartment building in a historic neighborhood. The liberal argument emphasizes the need for affordable housing, economic growth, and the right of people to live where they choose. They cite data that shows higher density can reduce traffic and lower carbon emissions. The Conservative Council members push back, noting that the historic character of the area gives residents a sense of identity and continuity. They worry that tall buildings will cast shadows, increase noise, and erode the cultural heritage that has been built over generations. The council must weigh the promise of progress against the desire to keep the neighborhood's familiar feel. The outcome of such meetings often reflects a compromise that borrows from both liberal and conservative ideas. Liberalism does not go unchallenged. One common critique says that liberal thought pays too little attention to the deep roots of culture and community. Critics argue that by focusing on abstract rights, liberalism can ignore the ways that families, religions, and local customs shape people's lives. For example, a liberal policy that forces schools to adopt a single secular curriculum might clash with parents who want religious instruction. Critics say that such policies can create a sense of alienation, because they treat people as isolated individuals rather than members of a larger cultural web. The critique suggests that without a sense of shared tradition, societies risk losing the glue that holds them together. Conservatism faces its own opposition. A frequent criticism holds that conservatism resists necessary change, especially when old structures keep people oppressed. Critics point to historical moments when conservative forces blocked reforms that would have improved lives. In the 19th century United Kingdom, conservatives opposed the extension of voting rights to working-class men, arguing that only property owners could make responsible decisions. In the United States, some conservative politicians in the early 20th century fought against civil rights legislation, claiming that rapid social change would disrupt the social order. These critics claim that an over-reliance on tradition can keep societies stuck in outdated patterns, preventing progress on issues such as gender equality, racial justice, and environmental protection. Both sides have found ways to adapt to modern life. Modern liberalism often talks about positive liberty, the idea that freedom also means having the resources to pursue one's goals. This version supports welfare programs, public education, and healthcare, arguing that true freedom cannot exist if people lack basic needs. At the same time, many contemporary conservatives speak of social capital, the value of networks of trust and shared norms that help societies function. They argue that policies should strengthen families, local churches, and community groups, because these bonds create safety nets that the state cannot replace. In both cases, the original ideas have been reshaped to address new challenges like globalization, digital communication, and climate change. A useful analogy helps to see the balance. Think of a garden. Liberal ideas are like the sunlight that allows each plant to grow toward the sky, encouraging diversity and reaching for the light. Conservative ideas are like the garden's fence, keeping out weeds, protecting the soil, and preserving the shape of the plot. If the fence is too high, the garden cannot get fresh air. If the sun is too strong, the soil may dry out. A healthy garden needs both light and a sturdy border. The same balance is needed in politics, where freedom and order must work together. Historical anecdotes illustrate how the two ideas have shaped real events. In 1848, a wave of revolutions swept across Europe, driven by liberal demands for constitutions, free press, and national self-determination. In places like the German states and the Austrian Empire, liberal parties formed, organized rallies, and pressed monarchs to share power. Although many of those uprisings were crushed, the liberal movement left a lasting imprint, leading to the eventual establishment of parliamentary systems and civil liberties in many countries. On the opposite side, after the French Revolution, a coalition of monarchists, clergy, and aristocrats formed the Bourbon Restoration. They rolled back many revolutionary reforms, reinstated the Catholic Church's influence, and tried to restore the old social order. This conservative reaction showed how powerful a desire for stability can be when societies feel threatened by rapid change. In the United States, the clash can be seen in the debate over the First Amendment. Liberals often argue that the amendment protects free speech for all, including controversial or unpopular ideas. Conservatives sometimes stress that the same amendment also protects the right of communities to enforce standards of decency in public spaces, such as limiting obscene content. The Supreme Court's decisions over the years reflect a constant balancing act, showing how both ideas shape law. In the modern world, liberal and conservative ideas appear in many policy arenas. Climate policy, for instance, sees liberals pushing for strong government regulation, renewable energy subsidies, and international agreements. Conservatives often argue that market-based solutions, private innovation, and respect for local economies will achieve better results without heavy state intervention. Both sides claim to protect the common good, but they differ on the role of the state versus the market. The discussion of school dress codes and city zoning also brings in the concept of pluralism, a liberal idea that a society should accommodate many different ways of life. Pluralism says that the state's job is to protect a variety of lifestyles, as long as they do not harm others. In contrast, the conservative principle of organic society holds that communities develop a shared culture over time, and that sudden changes can break the social fabric. When a school board decides to ban certain clothing items, the liberal view would ask whether the rule respects individual rights, while the conservative view would ask whether the rule preserves the school's long-standing values. Real-world applications extend to the digital realm. Social media platforms must decide how to handle hate speech. A liberal approach might favor broad protection of speech, arguing that users should be free to express ideas, even if they are offensive, because open debate leads to truth. A conservative approach might stress the need for community standards that keep the platform safe and respectful, arguing that unchecked speech can erode trust and lead to chaos. Both sides draw on their core ideas about freedom and order. Modern interpretations also show how the two traditions can blend. Some political parties call themselves liberal conservative, trying to combine free market economics with a respect for cultural heritage. In the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party, under Margaret Thatcher, adopted many liberal economic policies, such as deregulation and privatization, while still emphasizing traditional British values. In Canada, the Liberal Party has embraced multiculturalism, a liberal principle, while also supporting policies that protect the country's historical institutions. These hybrids illustrate that the lines between ideologies are not always rigid. The next section will turn to socialism, a third major current that argues for collective ownership of resources and a more equal distribution of wealth. That discussion will show how socialism both shares points with liberalism, such as concern for human welfare, and clashes with conservatism's emphasis on tradition and hierarchy. By comparing these three currents, the viewer will see how different ideas shape the political choices societies make every day. In closing, the map of modern political thought is shaped by two powerful forces. Liberalism lifts the individual, asks for equal rights, and pushes for change that expands freedom. Conservatism holds the past, values community bonds, and urges caution when altering long-standing ways. The school dress code debate and the city council zoning meeting are small stages where these big ideas play out. History shows that both ideas have risen and fallen, sometimes working together, sometimes clashing. Understanding their origins, key thinkers, arguments, and critiques helps to see why politics feels both familiar and ever-changing. The story continues with socialism, which will add another layer to the picture of how people imagine the best way to live together. The story of socialism and communism begins in the early 19th century, when the world was changing fast. Factories grew, cities swelled, and many people felt that the old rules of ownership no longer served the many. A German thinker named Karl Marx wrote that the history of society is the history of class struggles. He argued that the owners of factories, called the bourgeoisie, earned profit by paying workers less than the value of what they produced. Marx called this gap surplus value. He believed that the workers, the proletariat, would one day see this unfairness, join together, and change the system. Marx wrote, "Look, the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains." they have a world to win. That line captures the hope that a new system could bring freedom from poverty. Marx's ideas were not just theory. They were meant to guide action. He and his friend Friedrich Engels published a short book called The Communist Manifesto in 1848. In it, they described a world where the means of production, factories, land, machines, belonged to everyone, not to a few owners. They called this common ownership. Under common ownership, each person would receive according to need and contribute according to ability. The term socialism is often used for the first step toward that goal. Socialism means that the community, through the state or through cooperatives, controls key resources. The idea is that decisions about production are made for the common good, not for private profit. Communism is the later stage, where the state itself would disappear, because people would manage resources together without a ruler. Both ideas share the belief that sharing wealth can reduce inequality. In the years after Marx wrote, many people tried to turn his ideas into practice. The most famous attempt was the Russian Revolution of 1917. In that year, a group called the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the Tsarist government. They promised kulfis, land and bread, to the exhausted soldiers and peasants. Lenin adapted Marx's ideas to the Russian situation, arguing that a small, disciplined party could lead the workers even before the whole country was ready. He wrote, "The goal of socialism is to create a society in which the workers control the means of production." After the revolution, the new government nationalized land, banks and factories, claiming to move toward a classless society. The Russian experiment sparked both hope and fear around the world. Some saw it as proof that a fairer world could be built. Others saw the loss of private property as a threat to personal freedom. The story of the revolution also shows how ideas meet real life. The Bolsheviks faced civil war, famine, and economic chaos. Their attempts to plan the whole economy often led to shortages and low productivity. Critics point to those problems when they argue that central planning cannot match the speed and flexibility of market decisions. A second historical episode shows a different path. In the early 20th century, the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, began to build a welfare model that mixed market activity with strong public services. Labor unions, socialist parties, and progressive governments worked together to create universal health care, free education, and generous unemployment benefits. The model did not abolish private ownership of factories or farms. Instead, it taxed wealth and profit to fund public goods. The result was a society where most people enjoyed high living standards, low poverty, and strong social safety nets. The Nordic example is often called democratic socialism because it blends democratic politics with socialist economics. Today, many contemporary advocates pick up the same ideas. Politicians such as Bernie Sanders in the United States speak of political revolution that would bring free college, Medicare for all, and higher taxes on the richest. In Europe, parties like Spain's Podemos and Greece's Syriza argue for more public control of housing and energy. Their language echoes Marx's call for workers to own the fruits of their labor, but they usually stop short of demanding the abolition of all markets. Instead, they ask for a balance where the market serves the public, not the other way around. To see how these ideas work in everyday life, imagine a co-op grocery store. In a co-op, the shoppers are also the owners. Each member buys a small share, and together they elect a board that decides what foods to stock, how to set prices, and how to share any profit. Because the members are both buyers and owners, the store often focuses on local produce, fair wages for workers, and lower prices for members. The profit is returned to the members as a dividend, not taken by a distant investor. This simple structure shows how common ownership can change the relationship between producer and consumer. A second example is a public library system. Libraries are funded by taxes and run by public officials. No one owns the books, but everyone can borrow them for free. The library's mission is to give all citizens access to knowledge, regardless of income. In this way, the library embodies the socialist principle that essential resources, here, information, belong to the community. The library also supports personal freedom by letting people choose what to read without market pressure. These examples help answer the question, why would a society want to share resources? One analogy compares a pizza to a community. If one person takes the whole pizza and leaves none for the rest, the group will feel hungry and resentful. If the pizza is sliced into fair pieces, everyone gets a share and can enjoy the meal together. Socialism aims to slice the pizza of wealth and opportunity so that each person gets enough to live well. Yet, there are strong counter-arguments. The first concerns efficiency. Critics say that when the state or a cooperative decides what to produce, it cannot respond quickly to changes in demand. In a market, a baker sees that more people want sourdough and can bake more of it right away. In a centrally planned system, the baker might have to wait for a bureaucratic order, which can lead to shortages. This argument points to the Soviet experience, where factories often produced items no one needed, while basic goods were scarce. The second counter-argument focuses on personal freedom. Some argue that when the government owns most resources, individuals lose the right to choose where to work, what to buy, or how to invest their money. They fear that a powerful state could dictate not only economic choices but also political beliefs. This concern was voiced by many who left the Soviet Union after the Cold War, saying that the state tells you what you can own, what you can read, even what you can think. The fear is that without private property, personal autonomy erodes. Supporters of socialism answer these worries by pointing to modern mixed economies. They note that many countries combine market mechanisms with strong public services, achieving both efficiency and fairness. For instance, Germany's social market economy allows private firms to compete while guaranteeing healthcare, pensions, and worker protections. Proponents argue that the market can handle everyday goods, while the state steps in for health, education, and housing, areas where profit motives can hurt the vulnerable. Modern thinkers also propose new forms of socialism that keep technology at the forefront. Some suggest digital commons, where online platforms are owned by users rather than corporations. In this view, a social media site could be run by a cooperative of its members, who decide how data is used and share any advertising revenue. Others talk about green socialism, where the transition to renewable energy is managed publicly to avoid profit-driven pollution. These ideas show that socialism is not a single fixed plan, but a set of tools that can be adapted to new challenges. Historical anecdotes help illustrate how ideas evolve. The 1917 Russian Revolution began with a small group of workers and soldiers storming the Winter Palace. Their success inspired uprisings in Hungary, China, and Cuba. Yet, the Russian experiment also faced internal conflict. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin introduced a more authoritarian version of communism, marked by forced collectivization of farms and severe repression. The shift from the early hopeful slogans to a harsh regime shows how power can corrupt even well-intended ideas. In contrast, the Nordic welfare model grew slowly through democratic elections and peaceful reforms. In Sweden, the Social Democratic Party won a majority in 1932 and introduced policies like universal health care and unemployment insurance. The reforms were debated in Parliament, and the public voted on them in referendums. Over decades, the system was refined, not imposed overnight. This gradual approach demonstrates how socialist ideas can coexist with democratic institutions and respect for individual rights. Quotes from primary sources add voice to the story. Marx wrote, "Pull from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." This line captures the ultimate goal of a communist society, where work is done for the good of all. Lenin added, The goal of socialism is to create a society in which the workers control the means of production." A modern advocate, Bernie Sanders, has said, "We must build an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. These statements link past and present, showing a continuous thread of concern for fairness. When the ideas of socialism and communism meet everyday life, they often appear as policies that affect the ordinary person. A public library offers free books, a co-op grocery store offers lower prices, a universal health system offers care without bills, and a progressive tax system funds schools and roads. Each of these policies reflects the belief that society should share certain goods so that no one is left behind. Critics often point to the cost of such programs. They ask, how can the government pay for free health care? The answer lies in taxes and the redistribution of wealth. In Denmark, the highest income tax rate is about 55%, but citizens receive free health care, free university tuition, and generous parental leave. The trade-off is higher taxes for more public services. Supporters argue that the overall quality of life improves, and that the costs of poverty, crime, poor health, low productivity are reduced. Another common question is whether socialism stifles innovation. The counterpoint is that many breakthroughs come from publicly funded research. The internet, GPS, and the polio vaccine all began with government support. When the state invests in science and education, it can spark new ideas that benefit everyone. In this view, socialism does not kill creativity. It redirects it toward common goals. The conversation about socialism and communism also touches on personal responsibility. Some say that if everything is provided by the state, people will not work hard. Yet data from Nordic countries shows high labor participation rates and strong work ethics. The cultural expectation that everyone contributes, combined with safety nets that protect the vulnerable, creates a sense of shared purpose. In these societies, people often feel motivated to work because they know their effort helps sustain the system that supports them. The modern world adds new layers to the debate. Climate change demands large-scale coordination that markets alone may not achieve. A socialist approach to energy could involve public ownership of wind farms and solar arrays, ensuring that clean power is affordable for all. Digital platforms raise questions about data ownership. A cooperative model could let users decide how their information is used, protecting privacy while still enabling innovation. To bring these ideas into the present, one can look at the rise of worker-owned tech startups. Some companies issue employee stock ownership plans, giving workers a share of profits and a voice in decisions. These firms often report higher morale and lower turnover. They illustrate how socialist principles can be woven into the fabric of modern capitalism. In sum, the philosophy of politics that includes socialism and communism offers a vision where wealth and power are shared, where essential services are treated as public goods, and where the community decides how resources are used. The history of the 1917 Russian Revolution shows a dramatic attempt that turned into authoritarian rule for many years. The history of the Nordic welfare states shows a gradual, democratic path that blends markets with public provision. Both stories teach that ideas alone do not guarantee outcomes. The way they are applied matters. The arguments for socialism rest on the desire to reduce inequality, to guarantee basic needs, and to empower workers. The counter-arguments focus on possible inefficiency and the risk to personal freedom. Real-world examples, like a co-op. The idea that philosophy can be used in daily life is not new. Long ago, thinkers such as Aristotle asked how a good life can be built on a good city. In modern times, The same question appears when people watch the news, go to the polls, or talk with neighbors about a park. The earlier parts of this series explained liberty as the chance to act without undue restraint, equality as the chance to be treated fairly, and democracy as a system where many voices shape decisions. Now the story moves from theory to practice. By seeing how those ideas fit into everyday choices, the viewer can feel more confident when a headline pops up, when a ballot is handed over, or when a community meeting is called. The roots of applying political philosophy to daily life can be traced to the Enlightenment. John Locke wrote that government exists to protect life, liberty, and property. He also said that people have the right to change a government that does not keep those promises. When Locke's words were read in a small New England town in 1765, the townspeople began to keep a written record of town meetings. That habit later helped them see how each decision affected their own freedoms and their shared resources. In a similar way, the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that the co-general will is what the community decides together for the common good. Rousseau's idea pushed people in the French Revolution to ask whether a law truly reflected what most citizens wanted, not just what a ruler demanded. Those historic moments show how a philosophical claim can become a question people ask every day. One argument for using philosophy in daily life is that it gives a clear set of questions to ask. When a news story says a law will cut taxes, a philosophical lens asks, does the law protect liberty? Does it treat people equally? Does it follow democratic rules? A second argument is that philosophy can help people avoid being swayed by emotion alone. The philosopher John Stuart Mill warned that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. This simple line reminds citizens to ask whether a policy harms anyone before supporting it. Counterargument number 1 says that ordinary people do not have time to study philosophy, so they should trust experts. Critics point out that most voters simply follow what the news says. The reply to that criticism is that even a brief look at a philosopher's key idea can sharpen a question. For instance, reading Mill's sentence about harm takes less than a minute, but it can change how a person thinks about a proposed ban on a popular app. Counterargument number 2 claims that philosophy is too abstract and does not fit the messy reality of politics. Some say that ideas about liberty and equality are nice, but real life needs compromise. The response is that compromise itself is a philosophical decision. It asks which values are most important in a given situation. By naming those values, people can negotiate with a clearer sense of purpose. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. A farmer in Iowa who reads about liberty may ask whether a new regulation on water use respects his right to run his business. A teacher in a city school may use the idea of equality to argue for more resources for students who need extra help. In each case, the philosophical concept becomes a tool for asking better questions. Modern interpretations of classic ideas keep the conversation fresh. Contemporary philosopher Martha Nussbaum talks about capabilities, meaning what each person is actually able to do and be. That idea adds a new layer to equality. It is not just about giving everyone the same thing, but about giving everyone the chance to develop their abilities. When a city council decides whether to fund a new library, the capabilities view asks whether the library will help more people learn, work, and participate in civic life. An everyday analogy can make the link clearer. Think of a garden. Liberty is the space each plant has to grow. Equality is the soil that gives each plant a fair chance to get nutrients. Democracy is the gardener who decides, together with others, where to plant each seed. If the gardener only looks at one plant, the garden will not thrive. If the gardener ignores the soil, some plants will die. By remembering the 3 ideas, a person can tend to the garden of community life. Historical anecdote number 1 comes from ancient Athens. When the Athenian assembly voted on a new law about grain distribution, a young citizen asked whether the law would help the poor enough to eat. The assembly's answer was shaped by the idea of equality, and the law passed. That story shows how a simple question, rooted in philosophy, can change a policy. Historical anecdote number 2 involves the 19th century American abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. He quoted the Declaration of Independence, saying, "All men are created equal." By turning a philosophical statement into a rallying cry, he helped many people see that the law was violating liberty and equality. The result was a stronger movement that eventually ended slavery. Both anecdotes remind the viewer that big changes often start with a single question. Quotes from primary sources give the voice of the original thinkers. Locke wrote, "All men are naturally free, equal, and independent." Rousseau said, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Mill added, "A society that wishes to be truly democratic must give each citizen the chance to speak." These lines can be repeated in a conversation about a local issue, and they bring weight to the argument. Now the script moves to practical tips that any viewer can try. The first tip is to check multiple news sources before forming an opinion. When a headline claims that a new law will protect liberty, looking at a newspaper, a TV report, and an online blog can reveal different angles. Some sources may focus on the benefits, others on the costs. By comparing them, the viewer can see whether the claim holds up under the test of liberty, equality, and democracy. The second tip is to discuss local issues with neighbors. A conversation at a coffee shop about a proposed park can bring out concerns about safety, access, and cost. By listening, the viewer can learn how others view the same issue through the lens of fairness and shared decision-making. Those talks often lead to a small group forming a plan to attend a town meeting together. Two common misunderstandings often block good thinking. The first misunderstanding is that liberty means do whatever you want. Some people think that if a law limits a choice, it is automatically a violation of liberty. The correction is that liberty also includes the responsibility not to harm others. When a law stops a neighbor from playing loud music at midnight, it protects the peace of others, not the neighbor's freedom to be noisy. The second misunderstanding is that equality means everyone gets exactly the same thing. In reality, equality often means giving people what they need to have the same chance. For example, a school that gives every student the same textbook may ignore the fact that some students need extra tutoring. Understanding the difference helps people support policies that are fair, not just identical. The first short story shows how a small town used these ideas in a budget meeting. The town of Maple Creek had a budget shortfall. Some council members wanted to cut the library, others wanted to cut road repairs. The mayor asked each member to think about liberty, equality, and democracy. "What does each cut do to the freedom of people to learn?" she asked. "What does each cut do to the fair chance of all families to travel safely?" The council decided to keep the library and find a small increase in a local fee to fund road repairs. The decision was recorded and shared online, so every resident could see the reasoning. By using philosophical questions, the town avoided a split that could have left many angry. The second short story follows a high school student council that improved school meals. The council noticed that many students complained about the lunch menu. Some members thought the cafeteria should just keep the same meals because it was cheaper. Others remembered the equality principle. All students should have a chance to eat well. They invited a nutritionist, surveyed students, and found that healthier meals were needed. The council used the democratic idea of voting to pick 3 new meals. They also used the liberty idea to let students suggest toppings. The result was a menu that pleased most students and reduced waste. The school's principal praised the council for applying big ideas to a daily problem. Both stories illustrate how thinking about liberty, equality, and democracy can guide real decisions. They also show that the process does not need a philosophy degree. A few simple questions can steer a group toward a solution that feels fair. To bring the ideas home, imagine a simple daily routine. When the viewer reads a tweet about a new law, the viewer can pause and ask, does this law protect my freedom to speak? Does it treat people fairly? Was it decided by a process that let many voices be heard? If the answer is unclear, the viewer can look for more information or ask a neighbor. By turning each news bite into a mini debate, the viewer practices political philosophy without leaving the couch. Another everyday picture is a neighborhood clean-up day. The plan might be to pick up trash in the park. The organizer can ask, does everyone have the chance to join? Are the tools shared equally? Is the decision about the clean-up made by a vote of the residents? By checking those boxes, the event becomes a practice of democracy, liberty, and equality all at once. The modern world offers many places where these ideas matter. Social media platforms decide what speech is allowed. Citizens can ask whether those rules protect liberty or suppress it. Companies set prices for essential goods. People can ask whether the pricing respects equality. Local governments decide where to build new bike lanes. Residents can ask whether the decision follows democratic rules. In each case, the viewer can use the three core ideas as a compass. The philosophy of politics also helps the viewer understand why some people feel angry about the news. When a law seems to favor one group, the viewer can see that the equality principle is being challenged. When a leader speaks in a way that limits dissent, the liberty principle is at risk. When a decision is made behind closed doors, the democracy principle is missing. Recognizing the missing principle can guide the viewer to ask better questions and perhaps join a group that works for change. A modern interpretation of these ideas comes from the work of political scientist Robert Dahl. He wrote about chorearchy, a form of democracy where many people have real influence. Dahl said that for a system to be a true polyarchy, it must have free elections, freedom of expression, and inclusive participation. Those 3 points line up with liberty, equality, and democracy. When a city holds an election, the viewer can check whether all residents can vote, whether they can speak about the candidates, and whether the voting process is open. If any part is missing, the system is not fully democratic. Another modern voice is philosopher Amartya Sen, who talks about culpabilities as a way to measure equality. Sen says that it is not enough to give everyone the same money. It is important to give them the ability to use that money to live a good life. This idea adds depth to the earlier discussion of equality. When a policy provides a scholarship, the viewer can ask whether the scholarship also covers books, transport, and internet access, so the student can actually study. That question moves from a simple equal amount to a fair chance. The viewer may wonder how to keep these ideas from feeling heavy. An easy analogy is a kitchen. Liberty is the right to choose what to cook. Equality is the kitchen tools that each cook can use. Democracy is the family deciding together what to eat for dinner. If one person takes all the spices, the others cannot make their favorite dishes. If the family never talks about the menu, the meals become boring. By thinking of politics as a kitchen, the viewer can see how the three ideas work together. A final anecdote comes.